I think we are good to go. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, ISGF, for hosting the panel. And thank you to all members who are on the panel. And thank you, Siva, for setting the stage, because I think you have made my job very easy. The toughest part for me is to make sure that all of us stick to time, because I think it's a big panel, and I want everyone to have an input on the topic that we are discussing today. So what I'll say is, to begin with first, what we can do is, we'll have a 5-minute opening remark from all of you on the topic, and from your own organization and your experience on that. And after that, I will keep some time for questions. I have 1 or 2 questions for the panel. And afterwards, I would also like to open up the question and answer sessions for the audience. And I also encourage participants to ask questions to each other, because I think since we're looking at US-India partnership as a collaboration on resource adequacy, and we have panelists who have been working on this topic for a long time, so it makes perfect sense that you also ask questions to each other. I will ensure that we stick to time. We have to finish at 4:30 because there is another panel afterwards. And with that, I will hand over to Alice to begin with. Going forward, I will say we'll go in the order, but except Raj sir, we'll have you at the end because you have a small presentation, and we'll go in the order.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. I just want to start by expressing my gratitude for the invitation to participate here today. Really, I'm so thrilled to be part of the California delegation and to be participating in the India Smart Utility Week. Such a pleasure to be at this conference. I've met so many people and have learned so much already on this trip. So I'm happy to share a few things to start off with opening remarks about the California Public Utilities Commission. You heard a fantastic overview of the work of our state and the collaboration of the energy agencies in California. Just a little bit more detail about the commission. The commission was created in the state constitution and is about 100 years old. It has transformed in its work over the course of the 100 years, so it's very different now than what it looked like back in the early 1900s. We regulate, in addition to the energy utilities, both gas and electric, we also regulate transportation, common carriers, and telecommunications and water utilities, as well as we have some rail regulation. In the electricity sector, we regulate the privately owned utilities, which is about 75% of California's load. And so we do everything from rate regulations, safety requirements, consumer complaints, and everything in between, the distribution system, and we do a lot of planning for the utilities. Today, I think we're focusing on resource adequacy and procurement. And so I'll talk a little bit to add a few details to what you've already heard. First of all, going back to, if you'll remember from the presentation that you heard from Vice Chair Gunda, he talked about the process with forecasting that is done at a state level, so forecasting for all of the load in California out into the future. We're kind of one of the boxes that you saw on the slide where the forecast feeds into our agency, and we disaggregate it and divide it among all of the retail sellers within California. And so within that 75% that I talked about earlier. So all of those retail sellers know what their responsibility is. And what we start with is the 10-year planning. And that is where we're looking ahead. There's some uncertainty about what's happening in the out years, but we require all of the retail sellers to think about where they're going to be over the course of that 10 years and put together portfolios to cover that load. We are expecting load growth, and that is partially driven by our electrification goals. We have the vehicle electrification goal that you heard about. We're also electrifying our buildings. Currently in California, about 90% of our residential structures are served by gas, a gas pipeline system. But we are moving towards electrification, and that's one of the things that we're very focused on as part of our transition to combat climate change. So those two things, in addition to new data centers and other new supply of electricity, are going to lead to load growth in California. So we're predicting this and planning for it as part of first of all, the integrated resource plan process. The PUC puts together all of the plans of all of the retail sellers and runs modeling for reliability and for least cost best fit resources. And we issue procurement orders to all of the retail sellers. And so what we do is we try to anticipate the timeline for projects. We think about long lead time projects and then shorter term projects so that all of the procurement projects can come online consistent with our requirements. There are penalties for not complying. So this is a hard requirement that we put on our retail sellers. It also forms the basis of our transmission planning, and that's done by the California Independent System Operator so that we know that we have transmission to match those resources that we're looking to that come online in the future. In the near term, we also have a resource adequacy program that looks out in the coming year and looks at what resources we have ready to serve customers. Summer is our most difficult time in terms of reliability in California, especially because of the extreme heat events that we've had, and you saw some of that in the presentation as well. What's most difficult for us is a heat wave that affects the entire west coast of the United States. We're part of a western grid, and when it's very hot in Arizona, as well as Washington and Oregon and California, we have a harder time getting imports into California, and we have a harder time meeting our demand from air conditioning. That afternoon, our net peak is the hardest when solar is coming offline and we're trying to ramp up. It's still hot, everybody's still running their air conditioning, and that's what we've been struggling with in the past few years. So when we look at resource adequacy, we're planning to make sure that we have adequate resources for those hardest days. Recently, we've put together a plan to move toward a slice of day concept for resource adequacy. And that is looking at, we're requiring the retail sellers to look at the worst day of each month, and then they have to have adequate supply for every single hour of that day. And the worst day is the day of the month with the highest coincidental peak. And so that puts us in a position where we're safe for the worst cases going throughout the year. We're still transitioning towards this new system, but it's a way to adequately value all of the different resources. So solar gets valued at the right amount during the middle of the day, and then the resources that we need in the evening and nighttime are valued appropriately as well. All of this, of course, has a cost. And in California, it is the customers who bear the entire cost. And so the programs that we have had in place and the procurement that has already happened as we move along in our transition has all been borne by our customers, including early solar projects. So we had solar, I think we were the first, had the first solar project in California in 1983. And solar was expensive back then. So as time goes on, of course, we've seen solar prices come down, and it has benefited jurisdictions throughout the world. And but we're still bearing some of those long-term contracts. We have legacy contracts from early days. So our customers are having to pay for that as well as the new investments that they make. It's something that we're really struggling with in California, but it's making us even more focused on looking at cost-effective solutions as we move forward. I'll briefly mention battery storage, just because it has been very important for our portfolios. A few years ago, in 2020, we had about 200 megawatts of battery storage projects in California. Now we have about 10,000 megawatts. So we've seen and that includes both the bulk grid and behind-the-meter storage. We've seen a huge increase in battery storage, and it came just at the right time when we needed it. For our bulk resources, they are working together with the grid, and you can see, if you're interested, our California Independent System Operator, CAISO, has a very easy to navigate website. It's really interesting to see what's happening with supply and demand throughout the day in California. And they have a area of the website that applies to batteries, and you can see how the batteries work with the system, and they're charging during the day and they're discharging at night every day. So it is a nice complement to our intermittent resources that we have in California. And I'll end with that and turn it back to you, Shashwat.
Thank you, Alice, for sticking to the time. And I will pass it out to Andrew.
Great. Well, I'll try to emulate. Well, it's first of all, it's just really a pleasure to be here. I've been here for almost 2 weeks, and it's a little head-spinning. Talked to lots of people with incredible ideas, both on the transportation side and also on now this week the electric side, or the energy side, part of India's transition. So I know this panel's about resource adequacy and how we make sure that we get the resources available when we need them, and that we plan to have resources so we don't have capacity crunches. I want to, though, take a bit of an excursion onto the demand side, because I think California's problems would be, or sort of the challenge would be a lot bigger if we hadn't managed load from the demand side starting decades ago. And so I think it's instructive to kind of give a little bit of the history and then talk about what we're doing now. So the Energy Commission was formed in the 70s when we had an energy crisis. It revolved around oil. And the state determined that it needed an energy policy, and it formed the Energy Commission to do some things that were extremely relevant at that time. So number one, site power plants, sort of take the local jurisdictions out of the picture and pull it up to the state level so that we could actually have more sort of better planned and quicker power plant siting. And then also emergency planning. And then we were endowed with what then was a new authority, which was to develop building and appliance energy efficiency standards. So that enterprise started in California back in the 70s. And since that time, through many cycles of building code grades and building code updates and appliance efficiency standards that really have gone national and international, California consumers have saved literally hundreds of billions of dollars. And our peak demand, which is roughly in the state, say 65 gigawatts for the whole state, would have been a lot more. So if we sort of take that retrospective look, the demand side really has been a key resource. Today, we have, with electrification of buildings, electrification of transportation, industry, we're really trying to, as we all know, electricity has to be the backbone of our decarbonization journey. And so kind of what goes around comes around. We're really going to ask our electric system to do a lot more and to keep clean. And so in a way, it's sort of the modern, digital age version of the 1970s oil embargoes, where we really have a set of new challenges and we need new tools. So we still do building code, building efficiency and appliance efficiency, but we have two authorities that sort of complement those. One is called Load Management Standards, which is one of our original authorities, but we never really used it until recently. And that is essentially creating a platform that enables automation of load flexibility. So all of the utilities, time-sensitive, time-dependent rates are now on a web-based platform that's API compatible and with a standardized communication format. Any aggregator, any large load, any particular, in theory and soon to be in practice, any end-use device can automate around that web connection, whether it's price, whether it's around carbon content. Siva showed the heat map of the high carbon hours. A customer might choose to organize their consumption around carbon content. We might incentivize that. Or around a congestion signal from the CAISO. So really it's sort of a platform that will enable a lot of end uses to set and forget, right? Automation, we think, is going to be key to mobilize the demand side. And then the fourth authority is a new authority we have to require native demand flexibility functionality in end-use devices. So flexible demand appliance standards, it's called. So imagine sort of in a few years hence where you just have literally billions of end-use devices that are automated, sort of plug and play, automated around a grid-relevant signal that enables them to modulate in real time to enhance reliability and decrease carbon and cost. So we're working hard on all those. The first flexible demand appliance standard we did recently, still not quite to the effective date, but that was pool controls. We have a lot of pools. They use a lot of energy. And they don't have to pump during the middle of the day or during the evening ramp. And so we're going to automate them out of those time periods. So those are some things that the Energy Commission is doing. I think just to put it a little bit more relevant, maybe in the Indian context, we have, as Alice said, we've had flat load for a couple decades at least, more than really per capita flat load for the last 45 years. But that's going to start to grow again as we electrify. We have a goal for 6 million heat pumps. All of our light-duty vehicles will be electric by 2035. So we will have a lot of new electric loads, industries, hydrogen. We really are going to depend on that electric backbone. For India, so 6 million heat pumps sounds like chump change. I mean, you're going to have literally hundreds of millions of heat pumps being installed, of mini splits, say, as people have the resources, as incomes increase and people have the resources to buy AC. And so it really has struck us in our travels around the country and our conversations that there's a really fertile area to be worked on the demand side for us to really ensure that all of these new loads, if you think about it, it is hundreds of billions, really trillions of dollars of investment that individuals and governments will be making in end-use devices. It's a huge opportunity to transform the market globally for those devices so that they come with the right functions, so that they are good citizens of this new backbone, this new electric grid that we're building. So when we talk about digitization, this is the kind of thing that we think about. That's in practical terms, that's really what digitization means to us. So to bring this back to reliability and resource adequacy, efficiency and load management makes all of our other problems easier. Doesn't solve them, but it makes them smaller. And so it means we have to go out and lock in fewer resources in our resource adequacy programs. It means that we have better information and we have sort of more forthright planning. We have more tools in our toolbox and visibility into the grid. So we're really excited about that element. And we are, in the same way we did in the 70s, we're having to think creatively about how we manage our energy system to confront the challenges ahead of us. And I think there are a lot of parallels here with where India is really sort of both transitioning and growing at breakneck pace. So really looking forward to working together. So much creativity, so much know-how, so much urgency in both California and across India, and just really looking forward to the collaboration.
Thank you, Andrew. Now I pass it on to Sushanta, sir, from
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks to ISGF for inviting me to this panel discussion with wonderful and eminent panelists. I'll just give you a brief perspective on why this topic about resource adequacy has suddenly gained currency in India. I mean, just before the onset of COVID, we, at the state level, we are a federal country here. At the state level, there was a big hue and cry because the capacity utilization of the thermal fleet, we still have large thermal capacities. The capacity utilization of the thermal fleet was in the range of about 60 to 62%, and most of the generators, state regulators and the state utilities face this problem. They complained that in fact they had contracted these capacities on the assumption that they'll be able to use it up to 85% of the time. So per unit capacity utilization, per unit cost is increasing for them. They have not been able to, they're not able to use the generation resources created in the country optimally. But then they're paying the kind of contracting structure that we have here in India is 100% guarantee of capacity charge to the generators who have entered into contract with the load serving entities. Unlike in other parts of the world, including US, where you don't have the tradition of such a long-term power purchase agreement of 25 years and the load-serving entities guaranteeing to pay the fixed cost to the generating assets irrespective of whether that asset is being used or scheduled by the load-serving entities or not. That was something which was the need of the hour at that time, because you needed to give comfort to the investors to make investment in the Indian power sector, and that's why this kind of a comfort. So I'm not going into that, but given the fact that the assets which were created on the assumption that they would be used up to 85% of the time, we call it 85% availability factor or plant load factor. They were being used to the extent of 60-62%, and the PLF was coming down over a period of time. So this led to a to discontent in the states, and they came up with a very detailed report which is available in the website of the Forum of Regulators, which is basically a body of the state regulators. They calculated, what they called the per unit stranded cost, and the report showed that in Indian rupee terms, 1 rupee 34 paise for 10 states. A detailed study was carried out, and they said that on a per unit basis, 1 rupee 34 paise in Indian rupee terms is the stranded cost of the capacity which has been created. And there was a big difference of opinion and a fight between the center and the states. There was a blame game that it's because the whole planning is centralized with one agency at the center being responsible for generation planning and transmission planning. Possibly there has been some problem in terms of the planning at that time, because if you have planned and set up this much capacity, you should have projected the demand well. The demand has not come up, and we are not able, but our consumers are paying through the nose. And the other argument was, counter argument was that even if you have a central level generation and transmission planning, the inputs come from the states anyway. All this went on, but just after the COVID, we have had in April of 2022, which is considered to be a pleasant month, springtime. In India, the peak demand touched 212 gigawatt, which was unprecedented. Generally, in these months, we have about 190, 195 gigawatt as the peak demand. So we had a big shortfall of more than 10 to 15 gigawatt. So the whole narrative in the power sector underwent change. So and it is in this context that the concept of resource adequacy came to the fore and suddenly gained currency and prominence in the Indian policy space. People started thinking in terms of resource adequacy, and what came out is that we should plan for 2030, 32. We should plan our generation and transmission resource procurement planning in such a way that we don't reach a stage where we are today and engaging in blame game that there was. So you have times when you have huge capacities which are remaining idle and unutilized, and there are times when you are not able to meet your full demand, 212 gigawatt, because we did not have hydro at that time. Generally it comes in the month of May and June. So there was a big crisis in the month of April 2022. We could manage the system somehow, but then this brought to the fore the need and importance of this resource adequacy, and then a whole lot of studies were carried out. Then we, as regulators, we came up with the Indian Electricity Grid Code, where for the first time we provided for a framework of resource adequacy. Government of India came up with rules and guidelines. Central Electricity Authority, which is a planning body, they also came up with the guidelines on the resource adequacy. And it's still a work in progress for the country as a whole. We are still We have a combination of both top-down and bottom-up approach. Top-down in the sense you need, because you have standardized components of resource adequacy to this audience and to these panelists. I need not repeat that, but then it starts with a scientific load forecasting, so you need to be able to project your demand pretty well for the next 10 years. And it's this demand that you need to meet with adequate resources and reliably at all times. So first we do is what we do, we do a load forecasting, and then we make an assessment of what is called a capacity crediting, we call it, which means what is the capacity value of each of the generation resources that I have today. If it's a solar, do I attach a capacity credit of 10%, 20%, 30%, 35%? If it's a coal-based generation, what is the capacity credit? So across all resources, you find out what is the capacity credit of each resource, and then you find out the gap. Then another critical element is what we call here in India the planning reserve margin. So what came out of this whole experience that I narrated briefly is that it's not enough to have adequate capacities to meet your peak demand. You need to have some planning reserve margin to take care of the contingencies. Again, that's a big critical question. What is that level? Because if you have very high level of planning reserve margin, you end up having redundancies and the consumers pay for that. But if you have too low, then again you run the risk of not being able to meet the contingencies. Then again, despite that, we ran several models. We found that you will, whatever efforts that demand is growing in India, and it's so unpredictable that you cannot have perfect combination of resources which would be fully utilized, and you will have only 10%. Suppose you have a 10% PRM as reserves. You will have some huge surplus capacities in some parts of the year, whereas you will have only sufficient capacities to meet in other parts of the time. So we also have been thinking in terms of creating a market, what we call capacity market, which will actually, because you will have some states having long position and some states having short positions at every point of the time. So let states procure power based on their peak load plus PRM, but PRM need not be only peak load of the state plus PRM. It could be regional or national. That's the debate which is going on. And depending on the surpluses or the deficit that one has in the short term, as central regulator, we are trying to create a capacity market for the short term, which will help the states to meet their capacity requirements during the short term, in the short term period. And while we have created this framework at the national level, in terms of the bottom-up approach, we are trying to engage with the states and are now trying to help them come up with a resource adequacy plan and a framework. And we are also engaging with the state level regulators to come up with model with regulations which make it mandatory for the load serving entities to follow that. And there are provisions for penalties for non-compliance of the RA target that the state regulators set. I'll stop here briefly, and then depending on the question, I'll respond. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for giving us an overview of the resource adequacy framework that CERC is framing for the center as well as for the states. Now, I think it's a good segue. Now, we have heard from the regulators and the policymakers. We move to utilities who actually have to do this. So we'll hear first from Mr. Gagan Swain from Gridco, and followed by Mr. Sanjay Srivastav, and then we'll have the two other panelists who have a small presentation on the subject.
Very good afternoon. Thanks to ISGF and CSIS for organizing this discussion. I'm thankful for inviting me for this conversation. If you see just my friends from the California or other countries, Odisha, I'm representing Odisha, and Gridco is the single buyer in the state for the power planning, and it is interested with making the energy security of the state. And Odisha is in the east coast of the India and having 40 million citizens, like California is having 40 million citizens. And we have 10 million consumers, though the per capita consumption is less. We are having 20 gigawatt of generation capacity in the state, out of which 12 gigawatt is for industries, they are captive consumptions. 8.5 gigawatt is for the grid consumption. So the energy consumption, I think, the issue of the power sector is taken very seriously in the state of Odisha. We're the first state in the country to undertake the reform. The Regulatory Commission of Odisha is the oldest commission in the country. The first commission for the electricity regulation. It started in 1996. And we have the private partners in distribution utilities in 99. We have seen a lot of difficulties and the contingencies like California is having, drought and fire. We have Odisha is considered as the it's like a door for cyclones and disasters. We often face one or two major cyclones in a year. So we have learned in the process over the years, and our recovery from any disaster is very fast. We recover almost in 4 to 5 days. We ensure supply. The second aspect is that the consumption pattern of the state is changing. A lot of industrialization is happening, and the requirement is having RTC power. The process industries require, and the peak demand is also shifting because the consumption in the citizens, their aspirations has gone up. The living consumption for the normal domestic consumption and AC loads are growing, so the peak loads are shifting to 10 p.m. and it's up to midnight. With this background, with the grid consumption of 8.5 gigawatt, it's mostly we have fortunate to have 2.1 gigawatt is from the hydro, which it's a storage hydro. So what we are utilizing as a managing the load in the peak and off-peak hours till date, because we have a roughly 30% of capacity is from the solar or wind. And the state of Odisha, the growth is happening very fast. The state GDP is in 2021-22 was 11.5% GDP growth, vis-a-vis the national average of 7.odd%. So this GDP growth requires the more demand in the state. So considering the demand growth and the reliability to maintain the adequacy of the contingency planning, and to see that we are becoming a carbon neutral, it is a very complicated challenge for the state. We cannot do away with the meeting the energy security only to look after the green energy to be added in future. At the same time, the tagline of the state is that we have the cheapest power cost in the country. As a state, it's around 3.3 rupees, which is the cheapest in the country. So our tariff, we always claim that to attract the investments and for the ease of living, ease of doing business, the cheapest tariff of electricity you can have. And we have the reliable power supply. We have a very good network. The government itself spends largely in the T&D network. All the capex, 80 to 90% is spent by the government, so that the tariff become low. We don't give any revenue subsidy to the consumers. And third is that we have adequate capacity planning with us. We always say we have adequate power capacity. Even it is surplus power we are having, we always take care of the deficit in the national requirement. We supply power to the other states. Having said this, considering the growth and the energy transition, we are having today the grid consumption about 28% is the green power. Balance is fossil fuel. The challenge for the state is that we are the second largest producer of the coal. And we are the fourth largest consumer of the coal. So whole economy is dependent on the use of the coal. We have few districts which are completely coal-dependent districts, like Anugul. We have done a study for the just transition in the Anugul district, because all the citizens are dependent directly or indirectly on the coal. So if we're transiting for coal to green power, there will be a lot of challenges for the employment, the economy of the district itself. So we are planning smoothly for the energy transition, and as regard to the resource adequacy, we had conversation with the commission, our state commission, and they are allowing us, even before the resource adequacy regulation is framed by the CERC, we are having 10% margin available. We are keeping at a contingency reserve, which is the planning reserve capacity we are talking about. Odisha is one of the states which was taken as a pilot for the resource adequacy exercise done by CEA. And after the exercise, it was come out that 11% planning reserve to be kept for the state, considering our portfolio with us. With our contingency plan also, earlier we were continuing with 10%. Because we are one nation, one grid. Sometimes this 10% contingency become very difficult to meet the power demand. I'll give you one example. In the last April 2023, we got our 3 major units outage because of some technical issues. Roughly about 1400 megawatt was out of grid. So that time we had a planning and we had some powers available. But even we faced the deficit of about 500 megawatt. But this 500 megawatt, we were not able to get it from the market. Because this contingency planning of our state is available. But if it is not done at the national level, all the states are not making the resource adequacy contingency plans. So whatever any state will be facing in an emergency situation, that will not be provided by the other states. It's a good step by the CERC as well as the Government of India, that it will be made mandatory for all the states to have a plan, so that any contingency of any state will be made by the other states through a platform where commercial settlement will happen. We have the IEX, we have the capacity market we are thinking of, that will take care of. So having said this, the other issue is coming for us about the affordable rates of the cost, the tariff for the consumers. The cost of generation of the thermal energy in the coal base, particularly in the state of Odisha, is about 3 rupees 50 paisa. The solar is cheaper. We are getting from the other states. It is 2 rupees 50 or 2 rupees 70 paisa. But it is not. The intermittency is very high. We need to have a RTC power because we have a lot of demands from the process industries. So if we couple with the storage and the variability factors, it is becoming very high. It is not being loaded in the tariff structure. For the storage, till now we are utilizing our reservoir-based hydro stations, but coming days we need to have some pump storage. We have already planned about 1.5 gigawatt of pump storage, which is now under final DPR and implementation stage. With this, we are hopeful that we'll be moving forward with the same resource adequacy for the state, meeting the demands in future. And the challenge for the transmission planning is also another issue, so that we are also tackling with. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Now we move to Mr. Sanjay Srivastav.
Hello. Thank you, ISGF, for giving this opportunity to me. I'm representing BSES Rajdhani Power Limited, which is the DISCOM which is serving to Delhi city where we are sitting right now. So, might have been our experience with resource adequacy has started quite some time back. because we thought of having sufficient power so that to meet any contingency as well as to serve our consumers in a proper way. But currently, if I give little perspective about the DISCOM, so we are serving around 4,000 megawatt, 4 gigawatt of power we are distributing in the peak time. In terms of MUs, it is around 14,000 MUs we are serving in a year. So out of this 4 gigawatt peak demand which we are meeting, around 30% is coming, 30 to 35% is coming from the renewable sources. So renewable basically the solar, primarily it is solar, wind, and we have waste to energy plants also, 3-4 waste to energy plants which are very crucial for Delhi, and hydro is also there. So these are the basically portfolio which is constituting our renewable power. Remaining around 70% of the power is coming from coal, gas, and that that kind of thermal powers. So when we talk about resource adequacy towards net zero, basically our target will be on two fronts. One is increasing the renewable sources, at the same time meeting the peak demand. Secondly, how we can reduce our emissions from our existing thermal powers. So regarding thermal power plants which we are currently having in our portfolio, we have around 3-4 options. One is through emission control, which is already our planning body CA has come out with some norms that emission has to be reduced. So, but it involves huge investment is required. So that is where they are trying to put up the equipments which will control NOx, SOx, and carbon emission. So it is already going on in thermal plants. So we are expecting that thermal plants which are surrounding currently around the Delhi area, they will become mostly compliant because of compliant to the environmental norms. So that will reduce largely these emissions. And other ways to exit from the costly PP power plants which are completing their useful life. So in past also some of the plants we have been able to shut down which have completed their useful life because they were inefficient rather. And we have seen that if you replace the old plant with the new plants, there is a huge saving in terms of coal. If you, currently most of the units are subcritical. If we are able to replace them with the supercritical technology, which is around 660 megawatt and above, then there is a saving of around 10%. Coal is saved. So that kind of carbon can be reduced. So that is one approach which we are following. Second, regarding renewable power, as my fellow colleague Gagan and said, there is a huge challenge because of variability. Secondly, changing weather pattern is also a big challenge for us. Last year, normally we have our peak demand during the summer months. So last year, during the same months, April, May, June, which is the highest peak months for us, there was very low demand. So, and the wind, particularly these renewable power, wind and solar and all, they are also very much prone to the weather pattern. So these are, demand side challenges as well as availability side challenges, both are there. So currently we are aspiring, because our peak demand mostly occurs in the night hours. In Delhi, we do not have much of agricultural load, much of industrial load. Our mostly demand is coming from domestic consumers as well as some commercial consumers. Industrial part is very low. So major challenges, and that too domestic demand, most of the peak comes in the night hours. Day we have solar, plenty of solar we have contracted also, so we are able to meet through solar and other sources. But night becomes a big challenge when solar is out of our portfolio. So there our plan is how to increase power which is renewable as well as which is available during the night. So there comes the role of battery or other storage like pump storage plants. So one approach is having some additional storage power in the portfolio. Second is we have modeled different kind of products with the renewable companies like mixing solar, wind and battery so that it can become a RTC kind of power which replaces the coal power which is coming as a base load to us. So there we have already done some studies. We have floated different models and we are discussing with the renewable suppliers also. So probably going forward it will help us to replace coal power with this RTC renewable power. But biggest challenge is the cost because in India we are very cost sensitive, not like California and other countries which are relatively richer. So that there I think we are facing some challenge because battery is still not coming at a reasonable cost. So currently when solar is very cheap, 2 rupees 60 paisa, wind is only 3 rupees.
I think, sir, if I could just interrupt at this point, we would like to also hear from remaining our two panelists, and then we move on to Q&A, and then we'll have more questions from the audience as well. So, Raj sir.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. And Commissioner McAllister is my new friend who plugged in energy efficiency and demand response and demand flexibility. And I fully sympathize with Mr. Chatterjee's stranded cost concern. I was there 20 years back. Just for clarity, I was a managing director at the New York Commission, advising commissioners and other policymakers. I'll go back to the okay. To the topic of net zero, that's what I was struck with when he asked me to talk about net zero, how do you do the planning? We have the typical planning, as Mr. Gunda went through before, of reliability planning, and we also have what is called economic planning and then public policy planning. Subtle difference between these is the reliability planning is ensuring resource adequacy and transmission security over, let's say, a 10-year horizon. Even though you may have a reliable system, it may not be the most optimal from a cost perspective. If you have transmission congestion, you may be leaving money on the table, still dispatching higher cost units. So we came up with economic planning. Are there places where we can improve the transmission so you can minimize congestion and reduce overall costs? But both these things didn't account for the benefits of renewable power and other public policy values that we all collectively feel. So we created a public policy planning. So all these planning exercises are done on a 2-year cycle for the next 10 years, 20 years now, primarily by our system operator, independent system operator. We are, like California, single state ISO. And the bulk power planning is done by the system operator with inputs from various stakeholders, including the Energy Office, Commission staff, and other stakeholders. So what I thought I'll present to you are a few of the current thinking on this net zero. Why am I focused on net zero? If you can see the slide here, we have not just goals, now mandates in the state to go net zero. For example, by 2030, we have to have all the electricity consumed in the state coming from renewable resources, zero emission resources. And by 2040, 100% of the electric consumption has to be from net zero, from renewable resources. And by 2050, we got to reduce carbon by at least 85% from the previous levels. And we have shut down all the coal plants in the state. We had the fortunate ability to do that. We have 45% clean energy now and 55% coming from thermal resources mostly. And within the 45% is a mix of nuclear and huge hydropower plants and now solar and wind. So how do we get to this 2040 and 2050 in light of all the problems that have been articulated before. So the biggest thing that we have been focused on in the state, the system operator, as well as all the stakeholders and the state significantly, is what do we need to achieve that net zero future? So this is the latest modeling. Modeling has been taking place for the last number of years. This is fresh off the press, still work in progress. This month, presented by the system operator to all the stakeholders. It may be small print, but it'll be available to you when you get the material. So what we're looking at by 2040 is a complete drop in our fossil units. That's the goal, that's the mandate. No more fossil units in 2040. What is it replaced with? Replaced with a huge amount of land-based wind, offshore wind. We have the fortune in the Atlantic Ocean, we can get a lot of offshore wind. Not cheap, it's going to be expensive, not just the power plants, but the transmission to bring it to the land. And different types of solar, utility scale solar and rooftop solar and so on, and storage. But we are trying to look for a new terminology here that you'll see. DEFR is dispatchable emission-free resources. So that's what we're looking for to get to net zero. We got to shut down all the thermal power plants. You heard all the problems of ramping and other issues. And in addition to that, the climate change type of concerns, where we are studying what if there is a cloud cover for 1 week, there's no solar? What happens? What if there is no wind for a week, called wind lull? Offshore wind is all shut down. We're counting on 10,000 megawatts coming from offshore wind. What do you do in these situations, extreme scenarios as you may call? How do you meet the energy needs? It's no longer just an issue of capacity. It is how do you meet all the energy needs 24/7 of all the consumers? Historically, we have done planning, as you've heard, using a loss of load expectation as the primary metric to meet our peak demands, and having a planning reserve margin, or we call it IRM, installed reserve margin, to meet the peak needs. But going forward, we got to rethink our landscape. How do we meet all the energy needs in light of these new types of resources? So in this dispatchable emission DFRs, we call them, dispatchable emission-free resources, again, none of them are commercially there yet, but there's a lot of work going on, such as hydrogen, such as small modular nuclear, such as other renewable natural gas. Various technologies are being studied by various labs in the US and by utilities on small scale. So we're going to replace quite a bit of it with these DFRs, the needs of the future. The second thing I wanted to point out is the value of these resources, the solar and wind. As we add more and more of them, the marginal value of these is going to be much lower. Because as we move the system load curves, we are going to move from a summer peaking system today to a winter peaking system within 10 years. For all the reasons you heard before, electrification of building loads, adding heat pumps and so on, and electrification of vehicles, we expect a significant shift of our whole ecosystem, our electric system. And so the solar doesn't have a whole lot of value when the net peaks are later in the evening or night. Same thing, some of the wind. So this whole idea of capacity, how do you value this capacity of these intermittent resources? For the fossil units, it used to be pretty straightforward and still is reasonably straightforward. They're available whenever you call on them, as long as you have the fuel. But with these resources, their value diminishes. And that's something the planners have to care about. So while we are focused on reliability, just give me 1 minute, okay. Reliability is number one. We want reliability of the system. So what exactly are we looking for so that we can procure that? So we're trying to lay down exactly what are the attributes of reliability in light of all these intermittent resources that you're looking for. There's a whole list of them here, that there should be dependable fuel sources, non-energy limited, they should be dispatchable, quick start, flexibility, fast ramping, and so on. So these are the attributes that we want to focus on and develop the markets to help develop the resources that can provide these attributes. So this is the fundamental approach of how do we get what we want. First, you need to know what you want. So we are trying to quantify these, what we want, in terms of very technical, specific characteristics, and then go get them. And again, I won't walk through this. There are different technologies that have different attributes, reliability attributes. So that's what you're looking for in here. What is it that you would want in a net zero system, and how do we get it at the least cost? And lastly, while LOLP, loss of load expectation, LOLE has worked well, looking forward, again, we have used it for decades, the 1 in 10 year standard. We want to look at other metrics too, which you also are looking at, expected unserved energy or loss of load hours. This just gives you a perspective of how these metrics will look so different in 2 events, one in California in August 2020 and one in Texas in February 2021. LOLP, they may not look hugely different, but when you look at the unserved energy, there's a huge difference. So what do you want to use as a metric? And how do you come up with a standard? For LOLP, we have a standard. Whether it's good or not, it's still being debated. Does it lead to excess capacity that consumers are paying for? But if you want to shift from that and go to a different metric or use a combination of metrics, you need some standards and yardsticks. How do we develop them? So those are the kinds of explorations and working that are going on as we speak very actively to get to the net zero and still meet the reliability needs of all the consumers in the state. With that, I'll stick to my time and take Q&A later. Thank you.
All right. First of all, I'm the last speaker, so often you don't want to hear the same thing that you have heard from everybody. And so I would like to probably help you a little bit just to sum up what you heard. So that gives me additional 1 minute time too. So let me barter that time right away. So first of all, and before getting my introduction, our company's introduction, what we heard, Elisa started wonderfully kind of explaining that how in California the different elements have taken place, especially on the on focusing on the demand side and so on. And Commissioner Andrew talking about the history. And I think there is an important relevance of that history, and I would like to add one more quick comment on that. He talked about it started in the 70s, and that's where it started. So, of course, our state regulator, again, when I say our, I live in California too for the last 30 plus years. And I'm going to represent the consumer because there is no consumer on the panel. And I'll tell you what my electric bill is so that I can put my grievance right here. All right. So having said that, one of the relevant things, sound set? Okay. So it's a problem?
No, you can use it.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Understood. Okay. Fair enough. Okay, excellent. All right. So the relevance to that historical description narrative is Commissioner Andrews started talking about that what has gone into the energy efficiency, the load side, and so on. At the same time, or in fact, a little bit earlier, in 1965 New York blackout, a lot of things that started happening in the transmission side too. What you see today in the prevalent practice all over the world, it started in the 70s by having an organization called EPRI formed, Electrical Power Research Institute, where the utilities collaborated to fund what they needed to present to the regulators that how they are running the system optimally. And a lot of prevalent practice that you see, you heard that, okay, it starts with the load forecasting, it starts with this. The whole operation procedure and the algorithms and so on were done by EPRI in collaboration with those utilities. And that came to the transmission control room, state of the art of technology. The reason why I'm saying that's relevant for our resource adequacy topic here if you really look at the resource adequacy happens at different levels. And there are a lot of practices that got into on the transmission level, which actually, again, going further into the history as Commissioner Andrews started, so 70s it was the transmission control, Roma, and 80s. 90s it was the deregulation. And then the whole paradigm, and as Sushanta, you were talking about how the standard investment is a problem. We had the same problem when we hit the deregulation in the 90s, that how do you handle it? And so, of course, what I'm saying is there are some parallels, and we should try to learn from them. And that's the main thing I wanted to communicate. Going ahead in the year or decade of 2000s, it became the renewable as a focus. So we have spent a lot of focus on the renewable integration. So if you really look at each decade for the last 4 or 5 decades, a new frontier has come up, and there are a lot of lessons to be learned right to the resource adequacy at different levels. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that. So here goes my 2 minutes. So let me just introduce the company that I'm reintroduce the company, because how many of you have not heard Larsen and Toubro? Okay, everybody has heard. How many of you have heard that Larsen and Toubro in the digital energy solution business? Okay, so there are some hands. So that's what I represent. So that's the introduction. This is a global business that has been launched just a few years back, and I joined a few years back, 2 years back. I'm based out of San Francisco, California. It's a global business. Focus is how to push the state of the art of energy integration in the overall activities that we have been doing. And it hits right on the topic. I would say that we have heard it's all about, it's not only about the capacity, it's also about how you are going to be looking at the net zero resource. It's also about how do you handle the stranded investment in the long-term planning. So if you really look at it, I would like to sum up before I will sweep through the pages very fast. I would say there are 3 things I would like to probably add or maybe highlight, whichever way you want to say. It's about flexibility. That's the key. And the different elements of the flexibilities were touched by different speakers, if I may say. For example, I would say Raj was highlighting that it's not about how much is the capacity, but the question is, how do you take those extreme scenarios, which is flexibility. Now, it's not only those static extreme scenarios. It's about how you move from one operating point to another operating point. So what's the flexibility on that? And that's what, Alice was talking about, that when the solar kicks in, how we are moving the operating point from here to there. The reason why I was talking about all these changes in the transmission and so on, that's what they deal with all the time. But they deal with in the operational paradigm. Of course, the transmission capacity planning goes in, but then another element, so the second thing that I would like to say is the world of planning and world of operation. There is a little bit of I would say, more bridging that needs to happen in order to address the capacity issue, adequacy issue. And the reason why I'm trying to say is, typically plannings are for the static scenarios, because that's what the planning is for. But we need to look at the continuum from planning to operation. And it's there. It's not that it's not there. We do a 10-year plan. We do a 2-year plan, recursive, as you were saying, Raj. But then in the operational planning framework, we typically do 7 days, a day ahead, hour ahead, intraday. What I'm saying is, so this 7-day, day ahead, and the 2-year, there is a gap. Now, it's a matter of policy and procedures also. So my submission to the regulators here is that you got to look at that how the industry should work, because some of those challenges can be resolved at that level. So having said that, my last bit of piece that I would like to say is it's all about how we can model and simulate these elements and scenarios that we are talking about. And that's what L&T Digital Energy Solution is focused on. We'll be more than happy to get into more detail, but respecting the time, I have to say that my vice president has prepared this, so I just take the credit. He does the work. And Arindam, can you please stand up? I'd like to introduce. So he has been in EPRI for the last 25 plus years before I snatched him. And so he and I are both in the Bay Area, and we'll be, catching up. We were talking with Siva in the morning. So having said that, I'll just flip through these pages within less than a minute. So big question in resource adequacy is at the heart and center of energy transition. We're talking a lot of energy transition. Resource adequacy is the key. And if you really look at it, it's about flexibility, reliability, and resiliency. I would say, in fact, I did not want to keep my hat off, electrical engineer too much, but if you look at, there is a precise definition. How do you define adequacy? I think we need to redo that definition. That's all I would like to say in the interest of time. And these presentations will be available for you. And right here, you can see, I am just re-narrating. It's not only the capacity, it's flexibility, right there. So having said that, one of the examples is energy storage. So you can see how do we go from where we are, last year's report from CalISO 5 gigawatt, right, to almost getting into a much more penetrated scenario. And it kind of shows that what storage has been doing in the state of California. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go into the detail. And that's where I finish.
Well, I would like to say thank you to all the panelists. And at this point, open the panel for question and answers. We have the first question right away.
Yeah. I was going to ask Mr. Sivagunda this question, but Commissioner McAllister, I'm going to ask you, how good have your forecasts been? Because you must be seeing it over the years. And do you see any systematic errors? And what I mean by that is, are you always over-projecting? Because there's a tendency to do that, I think, almost everywhere. And just, if I could add to that, how much of your, Commissioner, how much of your load is shiftable? I mean, how much are you seeing is shifting?
Well, thanks. Two-part question, both really good. Let's see. So our forecasts actually have held up remarkably well. Even when we have had very, very stressful events, they've been within the envelope that we've contemplated in the forecast. We do several scenarios in the forecast, and so there's actually a whole set of forecasts based on different scenarios for the economy, for population, sort of, demographics and things, and a whole bunch of different kind of elements that we incorporate into a variety. And then, basically the three agencies get together and say, okay, what is the sort of most likely to occur set of scenario, and then that is the sort of 1 and 2 that sort of no longer represents a 1 and 2, and we're having to morph that. But when we've had events, as Vice Chair Gunda said, the variability of weather and climate change itself and its impacts has really made the forecasting more challenging and demanded that we sort of create these contingency resources over here on the side, right? And so we certainly want to work through that need and end up in a place where we don't have to do that. But I'd say that forecasting has held up pretty well. We talk about global warming. Really, it's global weirding, right? It's like the weather's unpredictable both on the lower side and the upper side. So I think it is a big challenge for the forecast, but in general, it's held up quite well. The CAISO uses a slightly more conservative sort of path for the scenarios for the forecast set that we all sort of use. So they go because they want to appreciate sort of local situations, which might be a little more difficult at the extremes. And then and Alice should chime in, but the procurement, the scenario that goes over to the PUC to use for procurement tries to maybe thread the needle very tightly, because any over procurement then goes on the bills for the customers, and so you want to try to avoid that. So the three agencies work together, and there's a sort of a healthy tension. We're sort of in the middle doing the numbers, and then the different perspectives from the system operator and the utilities commission kind of come in to contribute to sort of where we actually land in practice. Let's see, what the second half of your question? How much is flexible? How much is flexible?
How much is shiftable?
So we have a goal, I think the Vice Chair mentioned it in his presentation, of 7,000 megawatts of load shift by 2030. So we're roughly already at about half that, but we're really evolving the definitions and metrics to be more broad. Not all load flexibility is sort of push a button and drop load, right? That's what we've always done with demand response. But we're trying to be, as I talked about in my comments, we're trying to be sort of more day in, day out, sort of like a conductor of an orchestra, where the load kind of comes and goes along with the intermittent resources. Really match the supply and demand at any given time. So we think and actually Lawrence Berkeley Labs has done a series of study on load flexibility, and the potential is it's far beyond the 7 gigawatts. And as we grow our capacity to 200 gigawatts from where it is now, I think and as we install a lot of electric devices, that will go lockstep with increasing the amount of load that's actually flexible and automatable.
Just jump in real quick. I won't take too much time, but just a couple things to think about. One is we have time of use rates as default rates for all customers, and the other thing is that the load shifting programs that we've seen be very successful are the ones that have penalties for non-compliance. And so we have seen hundreds of megawatts being able to shift at certain times. Those programs involve capacity payments and then a commitment to shift load when needed. And those have been very successful. But it's in the range of hundreds of megawatts. It's not gigawatts.
Yeah, hi, wonderful presentation. Thank you. This is Sharath Rao. I'm from Center for Social and Economic Progress. A couple of questions. One for Mr. Jayant Kumar. The specific question on that is I think you point towards 3 things, which is flexibility, reliability, and resilience. My point is, like, how is resilience taken into consideration? That's the question for Mr. Jayant. And the second, I can ask the question right away, or I can.
Yeah, I can ask right away.
Oh, okay, sure. The second question is more on. The second question is to Mr. Raj Addepalli. And this is regarding the interesting thing that you got, which is loss of load expectation. Now, considering and you also pointed out pretty much continuously that metric might change. Now, my point is, and you also showed a table where you said the unserved energy in Texas as well as another state, which I forget, California, I guess. You're talking about crazy amount of megawatt hours over there. Now, what kind of metric do you already have in your head, considering that in mind? Is it still going to be tethered to loss of load? Thank you.
All right. So part of my answer is in your second question. You said, how does the resilience come into this picture? I didn't mention to you and to everybody that the challenge is that we need to look at the definition of adequacy. And I said, if you really look at the problem that we are trying to solve from the adequacy is, what are the new challenges? The new challenges are the loads are different, the resource mix is different to get to net zero. That's what Raj has been highlighting, the whole list of this stuff. The issue is, we are really going back to how to design the power system. Right at the basic definition of the power system design, you need to integrate resilience right there. If you don't, you will end up designing much more costlier system. What that means is that you got to have the asset and the system designed in a manner that you should be able to get the maximum utilization of the asset, and the system should be resilient enough so that you don't need additional asset to deliver resiliency. That's hence the adequacy. Again, we are not getting into the debate of how to launch a new IEEE PAR for defining the adequacy definition, but I hope that gives you the flavor in the interest of time.
So the two-part question, one is on resilience, and the second one is how do we change the metrics from current approach? On the first one, I also want to point out that the LOLP or LOLE that we've been using, again, has been there for decades. But there's always a question mark of are we building too much with that LOLP? At that time when it was developed, what's the marginal value to consumers of loss of power versus the cost of the infrastructure that'll be built? But those numbers may have changed over time. And second, another question that folks have raised in the last number of years is, when you actually look at the customer experience outages, it can be caused either due to loss of supply, bulk power, or it could be caused due to outages on distribution system or transmission system. And there are some studies that are showing that a lot more outages are happening due to distribution system outages. So then, as a policymaker, you want to ask the question, are we getting the right mix? Are we spending enough on distribution, or are we spending too much on supply to meet the consumer need at the end of the day? So put that aside, that's a question to be discussed and debated. On this other metrics or other ways of looking at it, again, these are not new ideas. I mean, these have been there, but I think they're coming into increased focus in light of the climate change concerns or experiences that we are all facing collectively. I don't have a yardstick as to what would be a new norm that will be used for planning purpose. I mean, having that is at least good information to begin with, but before you can adopt a standard, as Jayant was saying, you obviously need a lot of work to develop a standard, and any standard there takes 2 years, 3 years, sometimes more, and a lot of analysis has to go through it. But at least there's a realization now, let's look at more than just one LOLP, and let's see what other things are meaningful that would be of value to consumers at the end of the day in this changing environment. So that's where we are, to my knowledge. If somebody else knows more, that's fine, but that's my...
To add this, just a simple example just I want to give. For the year 2021 in state of Odisha, we saw that because the demand were less and we have the adequate capacity, the loss of, LLP, just a crude computation, we come out with this 4 to 500 crores in that year. Subsequent years it was less. But think about this, it's of our total power portfolio, it comes about 0.3, 0.4% of the total power cost. But it gives a tremendous flexibility to the to us to maintain 24/7 power supply. And the second aspect is that the industries, the loss of economy vis-a-vis what are the this amount is very less. And the rest of the period, because this additional capacity is there, we also made good amount of money, which is over, much over than these losses for this period. So it has the economic sense of keeping the reserves. Thank you.
Well, in the interest of time, because since we are already at 4:30, I will just put one question to the panel, and that could also act as a closing remarks from all of you. Now, since we are sitting in a US-India panel, and we're talking about resource adequacy, which is very specific to a state or a power system, what would that US-India collaboration look like when we're talking about a subject which is very technical, very specific to that state, to the power system, yet there are enough scope for collaboration. So, and that would be, I think, starting with Alice.
Sure, thank you for the question. And I think part of the answer to that is what we're doing here today, right? We have a group of policymakers and leaders in the industry talking about common issues and problems and challenges. And so I think that, alone is a great start. But I also, as you noted, these issues are very technical, and we have a number of technical staff that work together with Energy Commission technical staff and CAISO technical staff, our Air Resources Board, and I think having that more detailed staff-to-staff collaboration is also an important aspect of our continuing conversations.
Great. So absolutely, we've been talking with a number of states, and we'll continue to do so. And I think delegations are a great way. We definitely would like to get a bunch of state and national policy and utility folks, stakeholders over to California. I think that always helps to really sort of personalize it, and I think that helps build more effective collaborations. We have a list of like 20 topics that we could work on that are all of common interest, and I think it'll vary state to state, and by how many resources we really have in practice to dedicate to it. I do think we're at a historical moment that really for all of us, kind of stepping back and considering whether kind of our looking at the sort of institutional structure. You heard a lot about how the California entities, each relatively large in its own right, work together, and the graphic that Vice Chair Gunda showed was pretty complicated about how we all interact. That's because this transition takes a lot of heavy lifting. It takes a lot of hard work and analytical work and lots of different sort of disciplinary knowledge, and not just technical, but also behavioral and economic, and lots of other disciplines really are going to be needed to manage this transition. And so I actually think a bigger tent in our collaboration I think is needed to address all these issues, and then in each jurisdiction, think about, okay, what structurally, institutionally, what's needed to really fully address the transition in a way that's going to keep reliable power system. So I think the sort of institutional issues also are an element that I think we're going to find that's going to be very helpful to talk through.
Yeah, both, India and US have very rich experiences on wide range of issues on the energy sector, and it makes a strong case for collaboration, and in fact we are already onto that. As regulators, we can say that we already have an MOU with our counterpart FERC, and yesterday only the entire delegation from California was with us, and we offered to have an MOU. In fact, we have had an MOU earlier, and also an informal possibly bi-monthly kind of an interaction, and especially on the resource adequacy. And the demand side of the resource adequacy is something which needs greater focus in India, is what we believe, and there we have evinced a lot of interest in terms of the various business models on demand response, battery storage, and other DERs, the distributed energy resources, where we as central regulators would definitely like to learn more. But then, given the wide diversity and the complexities of India, India also provides a very good case study in terms of a plethora of policy and regulatory measures that we have taken, and we would be more than happy to share our experiences as well as we go along in our collaborative approach. Thank you.
The few aspects, the key learning from California or the New York, as far as learning is there and the collaboration is required, as Sanjay said, regarding flexibilization or the shifting of load or demand response is one area. Other area is what we usually say, the best green energy is the units which is saved by us. So that has been done by the California. So last 20 years they have met their power demand without added major capacities. That what I heard. So that efficiency or energy conservation measures, the policy and the steps they have taken, that would be a learning, and the collaboration can happen in that. Third is on the forecasting front, we are doing a lot of forecasting on demand side. From the generation side, forecasting is also it's a big aspect to take care because the variability of the renewable is typical, and we need to have the forecasting of generation. And that analytical tools and the way it is being done, with the experience, we can have a sharing on that. Thank you.
There are a lot of areas where there could be cooperation. We just touched on maybe 20 topics in the last hour. That said, one thing that I thought would be helpful is the institutional aspect, if you will, which is whether it's demand response, demand flexibility, unleashing the marketplace, unleashing the competitive enterprises to come in with new ideas, technical ideas, capital. There's a lot of money sitting out there ready to invest, only if the environment is right. As much as we think, I used to belong in I was in the government, I was a regulator, recovering regulator. As much as we think we are smart, there are smarter people in the country and in the world. How do we tap their energy? How do we get their ideas on the table and bring those to fruit? So being open to allowing the competitive market to come in, whether it's demand flexibility or other aspects of this business, I think utilities are one of the last ones to adopt new technologies, generally speaking. They're risk averse, relatively speaking, no offense. But even in the US, typically they're considered one of the last adopters of technology. So how do we get them to, so just relying on one entity may not be the best approach. How do we get collectively the best brains to work together and unleash is a good thing. And we are also blessed with a lot of labs in the US, national labs that do a lot of research, a lot of piloting work. I mean, that could be a huge resource that could be tapped and adapted to local circumstances here. How do we create new ideas and take some risks if necessary? You know, again, not insurmountable, not unnecessary risk, but manageable, reasonable risk to move the ball. And there's a lot of ambitious goals, and you need a lot of creativity and pragmatism to solve the problem. So how do we tap everybody who has the skills to contribute is a skill that is needed.
I guess, Shashwat, you have an excellent question, and I would repeat the question, and I think I'll add to the missing part of the answer to the question from my perspective. In general, you wanted to ask we panelists that how does this collaboration process and work will look like, especially given it's highly technical in nature, and there are lots of elements of local elements into this technicality. And you heard great answers from my colleagues, and you have been painted a picture exactly 20 topics, the business models, and opportunity harvesting, all those things can come out. So first of all, since it's also my concluding remark, I must appreciate and congratulate Reggie to have this forum and have this panel, because it's a great combination of all the regulators from both sides of the country, right? The utility representatives from India, so you have missing utility representative from the US, and I can speak for them for now. and so it's a great work done. So having said that, now answering a question, Reggie should be integral part of that collaboration, in my opinion. So that would be my first recommendation, and I'm serious on it, in the sense that the kind of bilateral treaty the two countries are already having, and that's what you're hearing from Sushanta, that the countries are already working. It's not that something new, and he talking about having the FERC handshake with CERC is a step, so I'm very happy to hear that. But at the same time, this panel and this focus is more on the distribution side, as you can see, and so having California delegation is stepping up, goes right in that direction. Now answering more specifically to your question on the local element, the best way for me to answer, I have been involved in a number of bilateral treaties from US sides, and I'll give you one quick example, and that way it will sum up. I was part of Climate Coordination Working Committee between US and China, The country may not be a great example in this forum, but let me just make my point. The point is, there were 2 utilities participating from the US and 2 utilities from China, and again, regulators and everybody. And we got into the same problem as you are pointing out. So we landed up developing framework and methodology. And to me, that's a continuous work. It's not going to stop. And the reason why that's very important, and that will be the unique contribution to the, I would say, we as a corporate industry, energy industry citizen, that's what we need to contribute, because you have been hearing this, oh, we have been doing this for decades. Means nothing fundamentally has changed. This is the time to look at and fix the methodology. Methodology is an evolving thing. It's not a static thing. That's what I see, the technical contribution, which can be global. It really doesn't matter. Now, how the methodology becomes applicable, in what context, in what scenario, that becomes local. And hence, you can define, for example, in that particular case, Climate Coordination Working Committee, we defined the methodology, but then each country and each utility went ahead and they defined how they are creating their indices under the same methodology. So I became a little technical, but the topic is technical. So I would say that the committee should collaborate to develop a methodology which can be an ongoing job, but it has to have a start good base, followed by the local implementation of the different indices. That's how I see it.
Thank you, sir. I think question is very relevant. And challenges are more or less similar what US is facing. Similar is here in India. So what I learned from this Commission of New York, that their institutional framework is complex but still very much working. So that is one area where we can learn a lot. Second is how to optimize this resource adequacy exercise in how to use this one to optimize the power procurement cost. That is the 2 areas which I anticipate will help us. Thank you.
I feel uncomfortable leaving without just saying how impressive what the project that India is undertaking is. You know, a lot of people across the globe look at California as a leader. I don't think that's untrue, but I also I think we've seen all of us just the scale and the ambition that India has, and what all of you are actually doing, and your various national and federal and state governments and all the stakeholders that relate to them are doing. And for example, the railways. I mean, you've electrified 65,000 kilometers of rail. And have made a bunch of sort of improvements to the rail system along the way. That's a huge, huge investment, and it dwarfs anything that we've done in California, certainly in the rail sector. So I really want to just, and I'm sure Vice Chair Gunda would have said something along these lines, that this really is a partnership among sort of friends, colleagues, and equals. And India really has the opportunity to leapfrog, to not make the same mistakes we and others have made, and invest in the right things, and really show that the transition can take place in a way that's efficient and effective and lasting. So that kind of is why I think we're so excited to partner, because of the just optimism and urgency and can-do kind of mentality that that everyone has manifested here. So really, I wanted to just say thank you for all that. You're really going to do the world a favor by showing that it can be done, and we're really happy to be partnering with India and the states doing it.
Well, I think on that note, I would say thank you to all the panelists, and hand it over to the next panel, which I think we have taken away 50 minutes from you, but thanks.
Yeah, before we, so I thank you all for the distinguished speakers. We'll just, I request Reji sir to please send. sir to please present the, yeah.
In 2020, FERC and CERC executed an MOU. Unfortunately, immediately it was followed by the second wave of COVID. Nothing much could be done. And thereafter, the leadership in both the organizations changed. And now if it is revived and if you started some activities, congratulations. But last year at Clean Energy Ministerial, when I met Vice Chair Shiv, he said California want to do a sub-national initiative. I was so delighted to hear that. I said I'll connect you with state after state, each state. So we started with Rajasthan, now Maharashtra, Karnataka, Madhya Pradesh, different states we will connect you with. And Rajasthan, between Rajasthan Electricity Regulatory Commission and CEC, MOU is almost final. And maybe within the next 2 months we will get it done. Similarly, good luck to you to Gujarat and Maharashtra, where you are going to meet the senior people. So with state to state is much easier to do than FERC and CERC, because bringing everybody together in one platform is not very easy, neither for US nor for India. Each state is different. Thank you.
Now I request sir to please present the memento to Mr. Andrew, who is Commissioner, California Energy Commission. Thank you, sir. Now I request sir to please present a memento to Sushanta Chatterjee, sir, who is Chief Regulatory Affairs, CERC. Now I request sir to please present a memento to Gagan sir, who is Director Finance and Corporate Affairs, Gridco. Thank you, sir. Now I request sir to please present a memento to Addepalli sir, who is former member, New York State Public Service Commission. Now I request sir to please present a memento to Jayant Kumar sir, who is Head Digital Energy Solutions, L&T. Thank you, sir. So now I request sir to please present a memento to Sanjay Srivastav sir, who is VP, BRPL. Thank you, sir. Thank you everyone for joining us.